like to dispute the statement that there is a landlord class. There are many different kinds of landlord, including huge institutional investors, individuals, pensioners, all the rest of it. So I don't think it's appropriate to say there's a landlord class. Just to put a little bit in context, just a sentence or two. Last Monday we hit 2 new national records. First of all, the lowest number of dwellings ever offered to rent, and secondly, the highest average rent. And the person who contacted me about this said, why is anyone surprised? For the past 5 or 6 years, punitive legislation has been enacted in waves, each wave more extreme than the last. And I'll put a little bit of evidence about that onto the record a little later on. Another correspondent says this: substantial refurbishment, which is in tenants' interest too, can cost up to €10,000. This feature, if enacted, will cause deterioration in existing rental properties and create very poor accommodation as time goes by. Substantial refurbishment is not financially possible when effectively rent control is in place. 2 things come into conflict, and I have a number of landlords. As the Minister can see, I have a sheaf of correspondence here. This is only a small part of it, because I edited it out so that I would speak appropriately to the first amendment. The bill is so restrictive with regard to the definition of substantial renovation that most property owners will find it impossible to comply with the criteria and will not be able to increase their rent even after substantial expenditure. Apartments and pre-1963 multi-unit accommodation will be hardest hit. If introduced, investors will no longer purchase this accommodation, which is going to further decimate the supply in the rental market. I mean, this is the market responding to the situation. The 3 of the following cause problems. A permanent alteration of the internal layout. Structural layout can't be changed. Adaptations for persons with a disability. Disability access changes may be impossible if the block has no lift. A permanent increase in the number of rooms invalidates fire certificates. An improvement in BR by 2 or more ratings, difficult to achieve and impossible on protected pre-63 buildings which are exempt from BR. A logical solution which would work for all property is to link the substantial refurbishment spend to the existing rent of the property. A substantial refurbishment would be a spend of over 80% of the annual existing rent up to a maximum of €10,000. For example, a property that rents at $1,500 a month would require an expenditure of $10,000. A property at $500 per month would require an expenditure of $4,800. So these are the figures that we're dealing with. Another correspondent accuses the Minister of conveniently brushing over 2 of the 3 additional measures, which are the internal layout of the building being permanently altered. The altering the internal layout of a pre-63 goes against the basis of the pre-63 declaration in the first instance. The dwelling being adapted to provide for access and use by a person with a disability within the meaning of the Disability Act. These are traditionally 3-floor over basement properties which do not lend themselves to any disability works. Again, as already highlighted, they are protected structures. The Minister's solution put forward in relation to these pre-63 properties is unattainable, and we have highlighted this to him several times since a meeting with the Minister on Monday the 13th of May. My correspondent here is Graham Farrington, and I just look to see if I can find the group with which is associated. Yes, Hayden Properties, H-A-D-E-N, Hayden Properties. So they have had a meeting with the Minister, and presumably during this meeting explained the difficulties that they had. The issue is, A, the majority of these buildings are protected structures and firstly are exempt from BER as per SEAI and Conservation Ireland, and the specific scale he suggests we utilise as a grade against refurbishment. Secondly, and because they are protected structures, should we follow the direction of the Minister and attempt to go against the Protected Structures Act, applying his exempt BER scale, these buildings, because of their construction over 100 years ago, will only come up to the BER scale between 3 to 4 scales without external or internal insulation, both of which are blocked by Conservation Ireland in consultation with DCC. So you're caught in a kind of catch-22 situation there. And I just want to put this on the record, because this is the kind of horrifying situation that landlords sometimes face. And I accept there are good landlords and bad landlords. I let out the basement apartment in my house. I've had good tenants, I've had horrendous tenants that left the basement in such a situation that I actually made an 11-minute television quality film of it. Anyway, the attached photo My sister went to a clinic in Malawi as a volunteer on no pay. She owned her own house in Kilkenny. She let her house to a friend for a nominal 500 PA. She was a good citizen and declared the extra income. She was then hit by penalties. The attached photo is what myself and the sheriff found earlier last week. I have not been able to get to the bedroom and bathroom yet. The lady involved owes me 11,000 euros. I had to pay the solicitor 4,000 and the sheriff 2,700 to send 2 men out for 10 minutes, and it cost me at least 20,000 to repair the house, and I have no comeback. I would only be wasting more money on trying to chase her. The whole process to get her out took nearly 2 years from the get-go. If I as a landlord do anything wrong to a tenant, they can claim 15 to 20...
Speaking to the amendment, but is there much more of this?
No, there's only one sentence more. What do I get from a tenant who leaves my house owing so much and in this condition? Only my deposit of 900. This is not the first time property has been returned to me wrecked, but it is the worst case. Here's another one. I have a pre-63 house, and the proposed legislation makes it impossible for landlords to operate due to restrictive clauses, as even if we invested thousands of euros improving the premises, we are not guaranteed getting market rents in years to come. So there's a very significant expenditure, and yet no return on the yield, no return as a yield. There's another woman who bought a house in pre-1963, and she said, my personal concerns about the installation of this bill and how it affects me are based on having recently invested in an older pre-63 building that is on the record of protected structures. The building is greatly in need of refurbishing, as it is unsustainable and unlivable in its present condition. Had I been aware or given advance notice of the imminent introduction of this bill and its restrictive criteria, I may have reconsidered purchasing the building. As it stands, my plans to spend a substantial amount of money on refurbishment works are in question, as I fear they are very unlikely to meet the proposed criteria. I am faced with an impossible situation, unable to move forward with the improvements and making the units available for sufficient rent, but also unable to resell, as we would not sell for a respectable price with the burden of this new bill, which would add to the future of the building. Another one was the pre-63 building. This is all building up to a strong case for these pre-1963 buildings. Pre-1963 buildings on the record of protected structures, and again, these two things coming together all the time. The pre-63 status and the protected structures status. Having considered the refurbishment criteria set out in the bill, I now realise that despite having had plans to spend in excess of 230,000 in refurbishment works, I'll still be unable to satisfy the very restrictive criteria as set out in this.
You're making a number of very well-made points, but you're kind of tending to veer into the repeating yourself category at this stage, I think.
Well, yes, but I'm putting some indication of the volume of resentment there is.
And I think you're making the points very well.
Yeah. We'll just put a couple more. The proposed amendment contains a substantial refurbishment definition that will make it difficult for most and impossible for some to gain any yield for an investment. On one other note, I could do substantial refurbishments, the first of which is crazy 25% extra floor area, but I'll probably do some others. I'd prefer not to do that, but the properties are interest only and still in negative equity because of Section 23 the previous government sold. Yes, I'm just concluding. Just one more statement to make. I could increase the number of bedrooms by converting the attic. Planning permission has already been obtained for the same. However, I will not achieve the 25% increase. And this person says, well, what, if it could be reduced to 15%? So this is the case that I'm making for this amendment because of the considerable distress that some landlords are in. Now, I left out a number of people who contact me and said, I have 6 properties, or I have 12 properties, because I don't think they're really the people who raise my concern. The people who raise my concern are the small individuals who've taken out an investment in order to guarantee their old age. And now they're caught with so many restrictions and so on. And I can tell you, as a landlord, I mean, I had very nice tenants, and I never put up the rent. I just didn't put up the rent. I kept it at the same level. And now, when I'm reletting, of course, I'm hit. I can only increase it by 4%. I don't mind all that much, because I'm not dependent on it. But there are elderly people who are dependent. And I'd like to ask the Minister to take them into account in this legislation.
Thank you, Senator Norris.